Hello, welcome back to the Hive, and we've got Lorna Leese and Joe Dodds, the usual crew, and we're going to be talking about models today. Not Airfix ones, not glamour ones, but business ones, and how you go about applying them, and perhaps which ones may be most appropriate for the current climate in which we find ourselves in terms of, rebuilding our organisations, rebuilding our workplaces, and so on. And I think, Joe, you identified one that was particularly of interest from Buffer, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. I just picked up an article over the weekend, and they were talking about how they've approached the COVID-19 crisis from a sort of leadership and management point of view in their business. And they said they combined a couple of business models that they've used in the past. One being about setting up task forces. So rather than having just like the whole leadership team having to do everything at all times, actually setting up specific task forces for each of the sort of areas of the business that need to be sort of moving forwards and managed during this time, but also using a decision maker model where it's not necessarily the senior person who makes the decision, it's the person who's been designated as the decision maker, and they sort of combine those two models. And I just thought it was interesting that Buffer's one of those forward-thinking organisations that we talk about their tech. They've grown really quickly over the
tell
last
us
few years.
What do they do? Just out quickly. What are they for those who don't know?
It's a social media management tool, so you can set up queues of content to go out over your various social media platforms. You can analyse the results, and you can use them to sort of schedule content out. So they're quite sort of new in terms of organisation. And I just thought it was really interesting that they can absolutely totally, as is the case with a lot of these organisations, pin down how they do things. They've got a way of doing it. They've got sort of, in this case, as we said, models. They've got things that they can draw on and structures and processes that they actually follow. Whereas I think a lot of older companies tend to not muddle through, but, they just keep doing what they've always done, which is have a big leadership team doing stuff and making decisions and disseminating those decisions. And we've talked about this, on previous shows and so on as well. But I just thought it was interesting that not only have they got a different way of doing it, they can absolutely totally articulate what they've done. And they talked about how it worked and didn't work quite as well as they hoped, and so how they've adjusted it to carry them through this crisis period.
Right. That's interesting, actually, because you tend to think, or one tends to imagine, that startups, tech companies are all a bit seat of the pantsy, a bit kind of just do it, just frantically being wildly agile, but in a completely manic and frantic kind of uncontrolled manner. And in fact, their ability to systemize what they do in terms of their product offering, very often in the tech world, they carry that through to the way they run their business as well. It's this: if this happens, that will happen. If that happens, this will happen. There's a kind of very controlled logic to it, which is kind of a bit counterintuitive to what you'd imagine, actually. So
absolutely,
yeah. Lorna,
I think it speaks a lot to culture, doesn't it? To organisational culture. And I think one of the things that tech businesses, disruptive businesses have on in their favour is that their culture is quite new. They haven't got the legacy of lots of very well established organisations, and unless you pay attention to culture, it just kind of happens. So you end up with this quite cumbersome, bureaucratic, large legacy culture in some businesses. And we said early on, didn't we, in these podcasts, that kind of command and control, information is king, hang on to everything, run one decision past 10 different committees. That's just COVID crippled you. It had to go. So I think the benefit of, and it's really cute, I'm doing some work with two very different kinds of organisations at the moment, and one is exactly as you just said, very tech focused, small business, rapid growth, and I think they have come through COVID especially well. The other have struggled commercially, but really interestingly, because they're a very large global organisation with an extremely traditional, what I would call a clan culture under the competing values framework, if you're familiar with it. So quite people focused, but they're actually a combination of clan and hierarchy, some elements of control. The people have felt safe and secure, but commercially they've not been able to move as quickly as they would really want to, and you need some kind of balance, don't you? Which I really liked about the buffer models was that what Buffer did is they said, well, we've got this team that are focused on commercials, and it's, you know, the CFO, the CEO, operations, we've got a people focused team, we've got a customer focused team, and then the CEO was a member of all teams, so could loop them all together, and they weren't off in silos, but they were just focusing on really particular things. And there was no CFO going, well, I've got to sign off on whatever it is that you guys do over there in marketing, and, you know, no HR head going, oh, I want to be involved in the customer conversation. It was just trust based, which is lovely, isn't it?
Yes, and we've talked about trust virtually every episode of the Hive since this whole thing started.
Yeah, that's my Hive bingo. Trust, bing.
We haven't said pivot yet, though, I don't think.
No, I don't know how I'm going to fit in the treating people as individuals today, but I'll try. We've got minutes left yet.
So it's interesting. So with this model that you were talking about, it was a kind of hybrid of a task force of specialists with a particular interest on the one hand, and the decision maker model that they got on the other, and they sort of fused the two, did they, Jo?
They did, and they sort of looked at what they thought was going to work and what had worked, and took those two together. So it wasn't, we've got to do this way or we're going to do that way. They did carefully think about how that was going to operate. And then, you know, they said that broadly it worked really well, and they talked about some examples of things that they did. For example, their customer task force released their customer relief fund when some customers couldn't pay their bills, and the teammate task force kicked off a 4-day work week experiment. So they had some really great results from that, and they just ran from March to June, and then they sort of made some changes from there. And as far as doing things differently, you know, they obviously are going to review what worked really well, and they're in the process of that, which is why they wrote the blog post, so that they don't just dogmatically apply the same thing next time. And clearly they finished this particular phase of it as well. So that's a bit like you were saying about sort of seat of your pants and agile. Their agility comes in sort of applying the right model, the right situation, the right sort of activity for the right situation, and being flexible to change that as things change. Not that they just do that forever now, or that they, as you said, just make it up as they go along. They do things in a very structured way, but they change it quickly when they need to.
Yes, they don't fall into the trap that Lorna described of becoming kind of slightly bloated and the kind of a prisoner of their legacy. They kind of
lovely phrase there, Jo.
What, a prisoner of their legacy, or a bloated prisoner of their legacy?
I will use that at some point if I can weave it in somewhere. I think it kind of does speak to the other part about tech business, new disruptive business culture, which is this idea of, and it's become a bit of a cliche, right, this fail fast thing. So the comfort with risk. I think those businesses that actually have already got a culture of being comfortable with risk, they have been able to react more quickly through the past few months, because actually that's just how they do things anyway. And while risk has been all around us, you know, lots of other businesses had all kinds of business continuity plans, and none of them involved a global pandemic.
No.
You know, the kind of health risk that they've had to consider for customers and employees. And I think it's just really crippled the traditional business model in lots of ways, and still is. If you look at this whole kind of, we're going back to the office thing, tech businesses, just small disruptive businesses are going, why? We don't need to. You know, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
But I think often they work overdrive in terms of engaging people and doing things cohesively, and that's why they can say why, because to them it works as it does. But a lot of the other organisations that are more traditionally office based, you know, haven't been able to adjust how they behave with their teams sufficiently that feels right, like the right thing to carry on with. You know, they're waiting till it goes back to normal, as opposed to shifting how they work with people. And yes, here we go, I've got normal in there. Cha-ching! I won't say anything else. What was interesting as well with the buffer thing, and we ought to put the article link in the show notes, is that there's a link in there right near the end of the article, in fact the very last line of the article, where they've shared all their team communication that they sent out through the whole of the crisis period, which again is just for me a real sign of a modern sort of agile tech company, which is that they are so open. So they're, you know, they're sharing it with us. We're not anything to do with their organisation other than I'm a customer, but they're sharing it to help other organisations and other people. But it also, of course, reflects so positively on them in terms of how they work as an organisation with their team. So, you know, we trust them as an organisation because of how professionally they are running and openly they're running their business.
So if we were to kind of summarise in terms of what's needed here, being agile doesn't mean just firing off in all different directions. You need to underpin that agility with systems, and in a clear idea of systems and steps and processes. To your point, Lorna, it's about trust. It's about giving people, empowering people to make decisions and trusting them to make those right decisions.
Your culture will either help or hinder you in this endeavour.
Yeah, and communicate. Do you want to bring in treat people as individuals there, Jo? We're going to get that in our...
I'm not sure I can.
I'll ring the bell
this time.
Did I have anything else to say on that as a summary?
No, be more buffer.
Be more buffer. Be more buffer. Love it. Okay, that's great. Lorna, Jo, thank you. Thanks for listening, folks. And yeah, be more buffer. Bye-bye.